Hello, and welcome to an episode of Conversations about Language Teaching. I am Dr. Diane Neubauer, and my pronouns are she, her. I am
And
joined
I'm
as usual with, yeah.
Dr. Reed Riggs.
Mhm.
Pronouns are he, him.
Yeah, and today we have an episode where I am going to be surprised, and Reed is going to lead off based on a book that he has been reading, and we'll have a discussion about that.
Yeah. I'm not sure where to start this story. Um, I guess I'll start with the recent why it's relevant now. Yeah, that makes sense.
Do
So
you
I was
want
hearing
to
a,
say
yeah,
the title of the book or
I'll get it. Yeah, let me
jump
lead
into the
up to
story
it.
first?
Okay,
Okay.
the book is called The Nurture Assumption by Judith Rich Harris, and it's an updated version. And so she says in the preface there that she got all kinds of complaints and backlash from scholars, and so then she wrote all kinds of updates to it. And so
Okay.
this book came to me about 10 years ago. I was in a syntax class with William O'Grady, and he had mentioned that kids who speak a lot and then kids who don't speak a lot seem to end up just the same. And so I
Hmm.
ran up to him after class and I said, "What is that based on?" Because I was collecting, as a
Yeah.
grad student, I was collecting research all the time. And I've always had a
Yeah.
big foot in teaching. I've never taken a foot out of teaching. So even when I
Yeah.
was into like pure syntactic theory, I was still
Yeah.
back burner in my
And
mind. Yeah.
just to make sure, syntax and syntactic theory, you might want to define a little
Grammar.
bit.
So grammar breaks into two main parts. Syntax is the ordering of words. Morphology is the shape of word. Morph means shape. So morphology is the shape of words. And so like in Spanish, when you put ando at the end of a word, that's a morphology thing happening. When you sequence the words, that's a syntax thing happening. And
Hmm.
so this class was emergentism, and it was theories about how to explain why languages have the word orders that they have, but based on theories of emergence as opposed to some innate. Like if researchers
Hmm.
were already saying that our brain is innately set up to sequence words in a certain way just from birth, from our genes, then what could be alternative explanations about what our brain is doing, if not innate, if not inborn? And so that was what the
Hmm.
course was about. It had nothing to do with teaching, but that caught my attention. So then he said, "Oh, it's in a book. I'll email you the name of the book." And so he did that. I bought the book right away, found the reference, and kind of forgot about it for 10 years. And so then recently, someone at my school was talking about students and saying, some students just get out there and start talking, and some students are real reticent. And how do we foster getting students to speak up? Like get them out there, feeling like
The
really
old get
outside
them
their shell,
talking
get them
thing.
talking. But this was more about
Yeah.
outside. Like how do we get them? And I do agree with the main point that this person was making, which was that that strategy will get you more and more exposure. She didn't break it down. So there wasn't broken into like
Hmm.
you get exposure through this. The mechanism wasn't that much defined, but overall I agreed with the idea that if you're getting out, if you're sitting quietly by yourself, then there's not much speaking or listening happening.
Hmm.
And then if you are getting in front of people and making mistakes and getting them to talk and you don't understand, but at least you're getting exposure and you are starting to figure out things people say in certain situations. Like I agree
Hmm.
with that overall mechanism outside of classrooms for growing in language. So then I put together a little email with a quote from this book. I took the book to school to scan, and I scanned the whole chapter, and then I found the relevant place again. So for this episode, I want to read two paragraphs, just verbatim. And let me see, it's on page 61. I remember that. And yeah, it's just this scenario. And then I think, Dan, you and I can just free think, just
Hmm.
spitball, talk on whatever we think.
Yeah.
Um,
I am
yeah.
already kind of buzzing with curiosity about the
Mm.
background of the author or the.
Yeah. Well, the author is as a researcher, and I will, to steelman her opponents. The book tone is very broad brush, and the book has a thesis from the outset, and so a lot of research. What
Mm,
most researchers would consider to be good quality research or good quality ways to talk about research or good quality science communication would hedge a lot and say,
hmm.
well, we've seen a bit of this and people are still looking into that and we don't know. We have a pretty good feeling about what's going on here. We get a lot of agreement about what's going on in this.
Mm.
And this other area, we still don't know and more work needs to be done. Like that's what
It's
researchers would
typical, yeah.
consider good, honest research. And it
Yeah.
allows other researchers to do the work of further research
Yeah.
because you're highlighting what's not done yet. You're highlighting what work can be done. This book really isn't that. This book is saying, so it's called The Nurture Assumption, and she's a clinical psychologist, I think.
Hmm.
Not sure if mainly practitioner or mainly researcher, but usually clinicians kind of dabble in both,
Yeah.
or focus on one or the other, but have a bit of both going on. And her main thesis of the book is that humans, it's not a suggestion, it's just an observation. Humans are very context focused. Like we're very attuned to context, and this starts in childhood. And the assumption that a family can control how their child will turn out, she's not saying it's a problem in family. She's saying it's a problem in the clinical research, in the psychological research. Like if parents do this or that, it's good for their kids. If parents do this or that, it's bad for the kids. Parents do this, it'll cause kids to go in a certain direction, personalities turn out a certain way. And so she just highlights through each chapter like all these context specific things that highlight that kids from really early on are highly tuned into context and they just code switch behavior, code switch language. The language
Hmm.
part's just a tiny part of one chapter, where the whole chapter is not even about language. It's a part of one chapter. But the code switching is she starts with a Cinderella metaphor that holds the whole chapter together. Cinderella acted one way at home, acted a different way at the ball, wasn't recognized by her sisters at the ball, but wasn't recognized by the prince when he came to her home. And
Right.
so she's saying that even though that's fiction, it's a really good metaphor for what we do see, is that people act different ways when they talk to different people, and it starts in really early childhood. So that's the context of this book. It will come back as an understanding. Let me read this little part here. And
Yeah.
then if we want to take in a different direction to like, now let's go to part two, which is about teacher practices, we can do that. We'll see where it goes. So let me read these two paragraphs. Children have a great desire to communicate with other children, and this desire serves as a powerful incentive to learn the new language. A psycholinguist tells the story of a 4-year-old boy from the United States hospitalized in Montreal. And side note from me, read that Montreal, they speak French there, trying to talk with the little girl in the next bed. When his repeated attempts to talk to her in English proved futile, he tried the only French words he knew, flushed out with a few nonsense syllables. Gadudu, boo boo, petit garçon. An Italian father living in Finland with his Swedish speaking wife and son tells of the time he took his 3-year-old son to a park, and the boy wanted to play with some Finnish speaking children. He ran up to them, shouting the only words of Finnish he had learned. I'm going to mispronounce this. It's spelled Y-K-S-I, iksi, kaksi, kolme, iksi, kaksi, kolme. Oh, Finnish for 1, 2, or 3. All right, now we know what it means. Okay, second paragraph. This fool's rush in approach is practiced mainly by younger children. Older ones are more likely to start off with a least said, soonest mended strategy, and there's dashes between those. So least dash said dash soonest dash mended, least said, soonest mended, and then no dash before strategy. Researchers studied a 7.5-year-old boy, I'll call him Joseph, who moved with his parents from Poland to rural Missouri. In school, Joseph listened quietly for several months, watching the older children for clues to what the teacher was talking about. With neighborhood friends, he was more willing to risk making mistakes, and he started practicing his English with them almost immediately. At first, Joseph's speech sounded like that of a toddler. I today school. But within a few months, he was speaking serviceable English, and after 2 years, he was using it like a native, with hardly any trace of accent. The accent eventually went away entirely, and even though he continued to speak Polish at home. And then she makes a comment in the footnote about how psycholinguists talk about how babies only have the ability to get phonemes between 2 to 10 months after birth. And then she says, I disagree with that because we wouldn't see such, native-like speech develop with kids that move from other countries around age 5. And so something else is going on. So I think that this idea that like we got to push them speaking now, there's something more that is innate to the kid, which is probably a social emotional thing. So I don't want to say it's an innate language thing. I don't want to comment on that, but that there is a social emotional thing that we already know we can't control about kids. Like counselors have meetings with families about these things all the time. We hope he'll get along. We hope he has a friend group. We hope she's a little shy, but hopefully she'll open. We already know that they have this, but to tune our expectations as teachers to this, like to the actual content of like teaching a language, I think is an interesting thing. My school has a whole thing about one of our goals as a school is individual pathways, and I thought I could tie it to that. We could call it that.
Mhm.
The kids can be shy, but maybe we should just let them be shy. And in this case, they said 3 months. And it's okay
Like
that
3 months of kind of being holding
yeah.
back and just kind of
Um,
mostly observing and being quiet.
Let me see. In school, Joseph listened quietly for several months in the school context, watching other
Yeah.
children for clues. But then with neighborhood friends, he was using English right away, but it wasn't in school. And so, yeah, there's
Ah,
just some
interesting.
twisting we'd have to do as teachers to like mimic that
Right.
scenario, because a lot of our kids in the United States in a so-called foreign language context do not have the language outside the classroom.
Right.
I teach Mandarin. I don't expect my kids to experience Mandarin outside. But so my thinking is,
Hmm.
how do I make my classroom environment something more like this, where they want to?
Hmm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I have some first thoughts.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
ready?
Yep.
Um, this sounds like it's conflating a little bit of like the personality traits or cognitive preferences of a like associated with like personality typing. And like, am
Well, she
I,
does say age. So she says this
yeah,
fool's rush approach is practiced mainly by younger children, and the older
right.
ones are more likely to be a little more reticent.
I question, well, maybe more so. Maybe there are trends with
Yeah.
more so,
Yeah.
but I was just thinking of like, yeah, I would be interested in like actual data on
Yeah.
that because
Yeah.
I think that there could be other things going on that's making somebody more reticent to talk as they get older. Like they're
Mm.
more socially conscious, I think, as a child gets older. And like by age
Oh,
10 to
sure.
12, they're
Sure.
like, oh, what do my peers think of me? Kind of a lot. But
Most
like
of this
that
chapter is
3-year-old,
about
they don't
that.
care.
Yeah, most of
Yeah.
this chapter is about that, not the language part,
Okay.
but it's about the
Okay.
social wanting to belong, wanting to not belong. She gets
Yeah.
into like kids have put up a filter where they don't want people outside to know about their home life.
Ah,
And most of this book is about the social side. It's just this little piece.
okay.
And she's using the
Yeah.
language part to highlight like even
Well,
in
the way people
language.
use it
Yeah.
socially. Yeah, like
Yeah.
the implications socially of using one or another language is a
Yeah.
big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
But the
actually I
thing
have
about
a
yeah,
yeah, I have a little
accent
anecdote.
development is yeah,
Oh,
sure.
go for it.
Well, I was just gonna say like the even though it's not the main point of her book, she's saying like even accents aren't a problem, like
Hmm.
for little kids. And we do
Right.
know for older, some I've heard 13 and over, if you kids who move from another country, even if they're surrounded by native speaking kids, like 13 and over, they don't seem to develop the
Not
accent
as
as much.
often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which to that I would say I'm not that concerned with accents. Just
Right. If yeah, it's
personal thing
about
for me.
comprehensibility is
Yeah.
enough, I think.
Can you
Yeah,
communicate?
and
Yeah.
yeah, and your accent is showing something about your identity and the path that you took through life. What I hear is that it's typical, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
of a Lord's Ortega chapter about age and second language acquisition, that like her assessment of the research was that there is no reason why somebody can't become fluent to a they're a multilingual speaker of a language. So they are not a monolingual speaker of it. But getting to the high proficiency level of someone is possible past puberty. But if you want an extremely like a monolingual type of pronunciation, the exposure is typically going to have to be earlier than that.
Sure.
And so, like by age 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there, if you're not
Yeah.
developing that language ability, it's very likely that you'll have more of an accent, an
Sure.
influence from the other languages that you already acquired as a young child. But
Yeah.
that, yeah, yeah, is that really a problem? I mean, it should not
Right.
really be a
Right.
problem. It's a problem socially sometimes because
Yeah.
people's societies make it a problem. It's not like it's a
Yeah.
lack of something linguistically or or
Yeah.
saying something about the intellect of the person, not at all, but it's
No.
treated that way sometimes,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, so to add to this through an example from my classroom, which at the same time can serve as a practical thing for teachers to hear. The first thing that came to mind that I'm already doing that I feel like already fits a solution to this is I saw that my seniors needed a lot more. experience with the kind of speaking test they would be given, which is saying something. They have to talk for 4 minutes about a picture and then converse with me back and forth about the picture for 11 more minutes.
Wow.
So it's very
It's
intense.
a long time. Yeah.
And I meet them where they are. Like I'm not trying to
Yeah.
like
Trying
I'm
to
not,
mess
there's
them
no
up.
gotcha. There's no gotcha. Like
Yeah.
I am
Right.
trying to
Because
avoid any gotcha. Yeah.
it's an IB, the International Baccalaureate, like required test, but you give
Right.
it as the
I give
instructor
it.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So
And I
standardized process, but with the
yep.
teacher that they know.
Yeah, and they provide me with exemplar recordings to
Mm,
score. And I actually wasn't I was following the rubrics up until 2 years ago. And I thought, yeah, this description fits the student here. Yeah, let's give him this high score. And they pulled him down, and then my dean had a talk with me and said they advise that you train yourself on these recordings. And so I did that. And I feel like I'm a much more skilled grader for these tests now, where I'm
mm.
familiar with those recordings. I even pulled them out when I was after I tested some of the students and said, I really think you're around here. Let's listen together. And I was listening, and I said, yeah, this is close to what you just did. Like we got to
Uh-huh.
really, really zero in. So it's not so free that I can just do anything and say you're a top scoring
Right.
student. Like it's gotta resemble what those recordings
Yeah.
are. Um, but so one thing I've been doing in preparation for that is starting with like junior year, like starting a year and a half before they do it. Um, they have a selection of pictures that's always on just a one-page document up on my computer screen. And we do what's called micro presentations. And I frame it like this. I say, this is about you developing your own interest and thinking about a topic you want to talk about. The main thing is about your, I don't want to say excitement, but it's about your interest in wanting to talk about something. And every time you come up here, we'll make this a routine. Every time you come up, feel free to give the same presentation again. Like if you want
Mm.
to lock in on just one of these are all topics we've studied before, different society, cultural topics. There's a picture for each one. Every time we do spend a couple weeks on a new text, then I'll add the picture representing that text up to the document. And so it fills up with like 20 different pictures. But then there's a lot of space for those individual pathways. For if someone wants to come up and like talk about five of them, they're welcome to. I say you're welcome to start with just one sentence. You can come up here and just say one sentence. If you want to say someone is wearing a green shirt, do it. If you want to do that for 5 weeks, go for it. I will add a little bit every time. So I'll say, hey, you could also say this, or
Mm.
I'll ask a question. We'll have a micro
Right. So you're
interaction.
doing
So
that part of the,
little
yeah,
interaction. It's micro
simulating the
too. So
test.
this it's a green shirt. I'm like, oh, a green shirt. Do you like the green shirt? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Go ahead and sit. And I can see that's where they're at.
Hmm.
It's because I can see that's where they're at. And I'm like, the main point is fostering their interest in getting up here. I also don't call on anybody. So I tell them,
Mm.
you choose when you want to come up. And this, for a bigger class, there's not time for everybody to come up. But you benefit from seeing the kinds of questions I ask, from seeing the kinds of things you could say by watching your classmates come up.
Hmm.
There's a reverse side to it, which is usually the most eager and capable student will come up first
Likes to
and
go.
then
Yeah.
intimidate everybody else. And so I have to tell everybody, do not be intimidated by this. This person
Yeah.
did way more than I'm asking. All I'm asking for right now is one sentence. So I set the bar so that the quietest, shyest, what do they call least
Least
mended? What was it
inclined to
called?
participate or something.
Least
Yeah.
least said, soonest mended. I never remember
Ah,
that
yes. Yeah,
from
yeah,
the
yeah.
book. Least said, soonest mended strategy. That I want to foster everybody, including their feeling of
Hmm.
safety,
Yeah,
because I
that's
think
great.
I
Well,
think
and
that's
agency
yeah,
too. You're
yeah,
leaving
yeah,
it so that students are very much in control, even though the
yeah,
test is this very fixed thing and you
yeah,
know when it's going to happen, but the path to get them prepared for it is much more chosen by them as a result. Like they can
yeah,
push themselves in the way that they want to.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what that is, and I think that is the in-class version of this kid.
Uh-huh.
What they
The
called him.
the fools
So
rush in or the yeah.
Joseph was the least said, soonest mended. So in the
Yeah.
classroom, he was super quiet, and then outside with his friends, he was super talkative. So I'm like, how do I
Yeah.
bring that super talkative space into the classroom? And so
Uh-huh.
I think it's okay if you need to, if you need to drill and whatever. There's places for that. And if you want to do that at certain times, as long as you have some goal for it, then you can. But I think students will see, oh, this is this drill kind of activity. I hate these. I don't want to do it. Oh, this is that
Yeah.
free speaking thing. I want to do this. And so you can have those different contexts in your own
Hmm.
classroom where they feel safe when it's this kind of activity and they can slowly foster that sense of agency, that sense of ownership, sense of safety, sense of wanting, like just the motivation. It's like, I want to.
Yeah.
And I tell them that you can all like we're doing more than just language here. Like when you use language, you're keeping track of meaning.
Right.
And a successful conversation for 11 minutes requires that. Like you have to be able to keep track of
Yeah.
meaning. And
It is
so
not just the linguistic
you're
ability
not
to know
just
vocabulary,
saying,
you know?
yeah, you're not just
Yeah.
saying grammar and words. Like
Hmm.
that, and that you wouldn't score well on it. We have three criteria. A is
Hmm.
language, B is the information we talk about, and C is your ability to go back and forth without me
The
constantly
interactional
supporting the
competence then,
interaction.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's part C.
Hmm.
And so I just make all that clear. But yeah, and also when I tell them this is for that test, then they're like, okay, I'm in. But
Yeah.
yeah, those most shy,
Yeah, it's
quiet
very
students, I
safe
find they
stair step
gradually,
towards. Yeah.
gradually.
Yeah.
So, and I
Yeah.
think it
So
needs
you've
to be
left
long
that room.
term.
I
Yeah,
see
it
what
needs
you
to be
mean.
long
Yeah.
term. It needs to take a long
Yes.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've allowed the space of a year and a half to
Right.
work towards that. So, and
Yeah.
made it, like you said, a routine. Like we'll do this a
Hmm.
whole lot. You get to
Yeah.
decide how you want to engage
Coming
with it.
back to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing that that passage initially made me think of was Reed knows this. So, I'm very much into personality theory and personality typing and cognitive functions as a way of coding those. But I'll go broader. I won't go Myers-Briggs personality temperamental sorter deep on this. But what I will go a little deeper on is like the ideas from Susan Cain's book Quiet. It's about introversion and about the advantages of being introverted and what does that kind of personality profile, which has like you can say it's all pseudoscience, but I don't think all of it is. There are tendencies among people and they start at birth. And can it be morphed and changed over time? Yeah, I think so. But there's going to be some traits that are going to be more natural for different people. And some of them are going to be more tending towards the observer and a little more cautious about putting themselves out there. And I think I've been thinking all these time, like lately, about culturally responsive teaching a lot because I'm teaching about that in courses that I have for teacher ed generally. But like the asset-based view of children, of learners, of people is now seeping into things like where I hear that and I'm like, don't treat that super extroverted kid like they're the only one with an asset, like so I'm like, I'm hearing it as like, don't fault a shyer or a more reticent or a more observant step back and watch type of a child. And I have heard this too, like when I was initially trained in getting ready to go overseas, I was going to be going to China and I took a week-long course on it included TPR, it included light linguistics, it exposed us to a lot of different sounds of different languages, and we tried them out in our mouth and like and stuff like that. From like Inuit, I think, had a sound that was like a THL kind of combo. Is really
Mm,
I love doing it. As you can
yeah.
see, I still do
Yeah.
it sometimes. But the course included things about how you needed to get out, have a routine, go talk to certain shopkeepers that have shown an interest in meeting with you, have a language tutor. Like they were all thinking outside the box of the classroom, where if you're the language you want to learn isn't like easily found in a course, you can just find a person who's willing to work with you and make friends with people and keep doing that. And you know what? I'm super introverted. And that kind of putting myself out was a real stretch. So, like, could I still learn the language? Yeah, absolutely. Um, but I needed at least to do things like sit in a cafe and listen and be in a line and rather than just try to think about the thing I needed to do or what I needed to say, like listen and watch the person around me and what are they doing and how is the person up front receiving them and like that is also learning. Like that
Yeah.
observational learning is powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think there are different paths to
Yeah.
this kind of
Yeah.
language competence is my point. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you're allowing that to happen in your classroom.
Mm.
I between me and my younger brother, he started out much more of that fool's Russian thing. I can think of a time where my family was taking a walk around the block and he was 3 and he was like on the back of my parents' bike, I think, and somebody came by like going the other direction on the same road and we're just out for walks and he shouts at the person, "My name's Chris. I'm 3 years old." And the person's like looking back, like,
Yeah.
what's the, and I got two cats. And like he's like engaging with this total stranger that's not
Yeah.
even really totally
Right.
responding to him. And like, if that's not fool's Russian, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
love my brother. He's not a fool, not now.
Yeah.
But it was that kind of really gregarious, willing to go out
Yeah.
there. And
A
like,
full in the
that was
positive
not
sense
me.
of like not overthinking it,
Yeah.
if that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
saying, yeah.
No, no,
But
no.
it,
I know
it
you know.
wasn't,
Yeah. Yeah.
dumb. It was just like,
No.
it made us all laugh because
Yeah.
like it was so uninhibited, you know?
Yeah.
And that was never me. I was not like that when I was 3. I was
Yeah.
like shy watching, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I want to just affirm
Yeah.
that both the extroverted kinds of behaviors or the socially extroverted kind of behavior and the socially withdrawn or introverted kind of, you can absolutely gain language. It's going to look a little different, and maybe the kinds of competencies that you
Yeah.
demonstrate in different stages will look a little different too.
Sure.
Like if you're more on the observant side and you're not as engaged in outward speech, when you get to the point where you want to develop that outward speech, you have a
Yeah.
great vast body of internal language, I think
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
theorizing a little bit here, but like, yeah, like the,
Yeah. There's the case of Wes, who's a big famous case study in second language acquisition. I think back in the 80s, and I think it was maybe Blave Roman. Somebody tracked an adult uh, Japanese speaker who was learning English as a second language and was very
Mhm.
gregarious, a very like sociable, socialite kind of guy. So they tracked his language growth and found that there were certain grammar patterns that just never developed beyond a kind of non-nativeness. So the question was, he talks so much, he was talking all the time, but how come it didn't
Mhm.
grow? And it was mentioned like, well, of course he got input. He was around people. I do wonder though, like, was he getting input? And I
Yeah.
wonder about this. Like,
Was
what,
he
like,
like
if you
masking
talk a
it, kind
lot,
of not hearing
well,
it anymore?
yeah, if you talk a lot and don't
Hmm.
listen to other people, like
Hmm.
just saying that you're with other people and saying that you talk a lot, that doesn't actually look
Yes.
at, are you listening? And so I'm not butting against the overall takeaway that researchers get from that, which is that there should be some sort of explicit noticing of grammar. I probably play some role, and there's a place to have it. You and I do
Hmm.
pop-ups in our classroom.
Hmm.
Terry Waltz does directional gestures with like
Hmm.
every single word. There's a hand gesture that moves in the direction of the tone. Um, I don't have any evidence of what those cause, but I'm okay with the idea that they probably help
Yeah.
acquisition
I
in
don't
some
think they
way.
interfere in a bad way, at
Sure.
least. And if they
I mean,
help a
unless they're
little
too
bit for
much, but
some, hey,
yeah,
why not?
yeah,
You know?
yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't claim to know or have any guesses about what exactly they do.
Yeah.
But
At the
my,
least too on grammar
yeah,
pop-ups, I think they solve the itch of the analytical thinker
sure,
who's like
yeah,
distracted by like,
yeah,
but why is it, you know?
yeah.
So
You
it's
have an
taking
answer
care
for
of
them,
that if
yeah,
nothing
sure.
else.
If nothing
Yeah.
else, um, but yeah, that question of like, you know, assuming that the extroverted speaker is gaining the most. I don't know. I'm suspicious of
Hmm.
that idea. Now, if they're
Hmm.
gregarious in a positively social way, so not talking over other people, not talking, rambling constantly just to be heard, and then ignoring when everyone else talks, but truly engaging with people. Like you go into a
Hmm.
store, oh, what do you have? They listen to the options. Do you have this? You listen to the options. Okay, can you make it this way? You listen to their answer. That's a true like back and forth of hearing how people use language in those contexts, and then using your production partly to find out if your production can be successful, but also um, to see what kind of responses you get from
Yeah.
that
Kind
production,
of the
and to just
crash
get
in
more
view of
quantity.
output.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
to get
Like
more
that.
quantity, like Krashen
Hmm.
says. Yeah,
Yeah. Like,
but I kind of think that that's probably better than someone who just rambles a lot in
hmm.
terms of language growth. Like you probably get more language growth. And I would think that compared to the person who rambles a lot, the person who just sits in a cafe listening intently to people or stands in line listening intently to customer after customer after customer and how they interact with the shopkeeper, my gut assumption is that they gain a lot more than someone who just talks over other people all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And I think too, there's another kind of talking over people, but then there's also the highly accuracy focused speaker where they're like so focused on have I produced this correctly that I don't know
Ugh,
that they're able to
yeah,
perceive with their full mind what's
sure.
coming back at them afterwards. So
Yeah, yeah,
um, that kind of I think of that as an inhibited speaker, actually. Like there are
sure.
people that want to talk a lot, but then the way that they do that speech is
Yeah,
like so
yeah,
focused on the accuracy of how they did it. And that's, I think,
yeah,
can be an interference too. It doesn't serve you the best ultimately.
yeah. I guess I
But
have
I
a
think it's a
metaphor. Yeah,
production based mindset where like,
yeah,
oh, I have
yeah.
to, if I produce this accurately now,
Right, right.
then I've got it and
Yeah, yeah. Well, and to touch on
over
teachers,
monitoring.
I think a whole lot of teachers have that as a default
Yeah.
mindset that push them to
Yes.
talk, that's
Yep.
what grows language. Push
Yep.
students to talk, that's what grows language. Get you to say this, that's how you learn this.
Yep. And it's
So
goes back
yeah.
to the ALM, I think, like the
Hmm.
audiolingual method, the idea that if you speak and you speak it accurately and
Hmm.
repeatedly enough, then you're going to be able to use it in any situation. And that's
That's the
you,
part
what
that's
you've
not
got is a nice
true.
little
That's the
chunk
part that
there.
not how
Yeah.
situations work. Yeah.
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 You might have a little bit of a, a piece that you can pull out of your back pockets, like a little card
Yeah.
you can pull out, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not a flexible language system that's adaptive and
It's
yeah.
actually not much better than having a little Berlitz guide in your back pocket to just
Mm.
say the thing you need to survive.
Yeah.
And
And
then if
and
you're like,
that's fair. Sometimes
which
you
is
want that.
fair for
That's
your needs.
okay,
That
but
absolutely. But if
yeah,
your goal is like continuous language growth,
right.
the memorizing anything isn't going to be the flexible thing that is truly complex, like
Yeah.
beyond when we talk about large language models today having like billions of parameters that all interact with each other, like a real brain's neurons.
Hmm.
That's about how complex language, like word usage is, and you can see
Yep.
that if you just open a dictionary or you open a
Yep.
thesaurus. I think I don't know if I said it on the show before, but I don't mind repeating it if I have. You can do a little activity for yourself. Open a thesaurus or go on a thesaurus website. Any word will have an example sentence, and usually that example, what I've seen so far, and I've tried this a few times, is that that example sentence will allow all the other words in that entry into that example sentence.
Huh.
But make up a different example sentence using any one of those words. Then try swapping in every single one of those words, and you'll immediately start thinking of like, well, that doesn't work, but that in this other context it would. Well, that doesn't work, but in this other context it would. You have as a native speaker, you have a vast knowledge of contexts where which word can be used, and it can only be looked at in like one like slice at a time. Like you can't look
Hmm.
at the whole thing all at once. And I don't think we have the capacity to think of the whole system consciously all at once.
Yeah.
So it can't be taught in the memorized kind of way. It's lots of
Hmm.
exposure. I think of error-driven learning as a new thing that people are talking about in learning psychology, and error-driven learning, not in a teacher sense of like produce errors and get corrected, but in the prediction sense. Your brain's a prediction machine. It's always trying to make predictions. And if you've heard sentences said in some way like, tell me the answer and give me the answer, and your brain then generalizes and says, okay, I can
Hmm.
put a verb there. Just put any verb there. But then you don't hear explain me the answer. You don't hear demonstrate me the answer. Your brain starts to get sensitive and it hears it in other places. This is going back to Adele Goldberg. She has a
Hmm.
book called Explain Me This, I think.
Yeah.
But she's like, why is it that native speaking kids avoid certain things? And is it just because it's not in the input? And she's saying, no, it's because they are positively hearing it in other contexts. And you
Yeah.
then start to develop these sense of different contexts. And then you just say, well, it sounds wrong in this context. She calls it preemption, statistical preemption. But that whole process is going to take a long time and lots of exposure. And it's not
Yep.
going to come from saying one sentence perfectly. It just can't.
Right.
It's just the nature
It's
of the
yeah, by
situation.
definition it can't. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
put a drop of water in a fountain and then turn the fountain on.
Hmm.
Like it's not you're not going to get it. Like yeah, and the water metaphors are good among teachers too. That you got to fill up as you fill up the
Yeah.
bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, One more thing with TPRS, I think I used to do in my classroom is with story asking. It would be the most like outgoing extroverted student who would give some kind of cool answer, and I would go with that. Like they'd kind of dominate the class, and I'd let them.
Hmm.
But then there'd be a second student who was the second most extroverted student in the room. And then they'd be like, "Oh, what about this?" And I go, "Yeah, that's awesome." But what was slowly happening is the quieter kids were starting to see it's a safe space. These are the
Mm.
kinds of answers they're looking for. I might explicitly say this is the kind of answer we're looking for. And is usually by the middle of the semester that even the most quiet kid would like raise their hand and be like, "This
Hmm.
funny idea." And I go, "Yeah, good,
Yeah,
funny
yeah,
idea." So it'd take that long. It'd take like 2 months for the shyer
yeah,
kids to go, "Oh yeah, I'm feeling up for it today.
yeah,
I feel safe
yeah,
and I'm feeling up for it today."
yeah. I've got a ton of thoughts about that. Do we want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah,
Like that,
sure.
yeah. So because yeah, being involved in like the general education side so much more now, like they would be like, oh no, you've got to make ways for kids to be able to express themselves all the time right from the first get-go. And I always feel conflicted about that because, again, I want to give the space to the differences of personality and inclination and just honestly the agency of the child. Like, do they have to give an answer every single time? Can they not just let somebody else, like, can they not just be part of the class today? I mean, I used to have one student in the high school classroom she was very quiet, but I know from her assignments that were written that she was learning. And she was absent one day. And I don't know, somebody said something about, people who are just always quiet. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, I defended the student and said something about like, there are multiple ways to develop your language ability. And some of you, I really appreciate that you're contributing verbally. And there are other ways to contribute and other ways that I can tell that students in this class are progressing and something like that. But I do think there's a wisdom in offering multiple pathways to give answers. So sometimes write it on a whiteboard, sometimes collect it in a poll that everybody types something. Sometimes have the one willing to talk or just raise a hand and do it. Sometimes have them pair up and decide an answer and then go with something like giving those varieties. I think it's always good too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I like that.
yeah, yeah, it's like I feel both sides of it so strongly that it's hard for me to to determine
Yeah.
a course of action, but I like letting people do what they want whenever possible.
Whenever possible, yeah. And I think it's okay to, like I said earlier, like it's okay to also have other things that can be routines. Um, well, like, my bell ringer has always been for like 3 or 4 years now to sit down, get your notebooks out, and then write some descriptions of a picture. And you can write anything you want. You can ask me, how would I say this? So how do I say there is? I go, yo, and they go, oh yeah, you said that 100 times, and they write it down. I'm fine with that. But it's a chance for them to get their thoughts together and then read something out or do something. So that can be that space for everyone to participate. And then there
Right.
can be
Yes.
then there could be a different activity or different routine
That's totally it
where
too.
it's like it's okay for just whoever wants to go and win. Now
Hmm.
I do have a couple students who I noticed were in my current junior class. I had a couple students who were just never volunteering to go up. And so I started to say kind of early on, I was like, I might try to convince you, but not today. And so but then in later days, like I think just 2 days ago, I looked over and I was like, I said the student's name and he like laughed and I was like, hi, how you doing? And he's like, okay, I'll go. So he went up and did it and it was fine.
Yeah, yeah.
But it just took
Just a little right
that good
amount of nudge that
intention.
time.
It's that good
Yeah.
little amount of, yeah, little good intention. That's what I want to communicate
Hmm.
first. So anyways, yeah, I think the bigger takeaway here is that it's okay to let students have a slow start. It's okay to let students have an introverted start, or
Hmm.
what looks like they're not participating.
Yeah.
To just make
Engagement is
some
more than verbal.
spaces. Yeah, engagement is more than verbal, and engagement can look like no participation at all. Engagement can just look like standing there. And I'm not saying a whole class should look like that, but I think it's cool to have a routine where it's okay for the first couple times you do it. Some students look like they didn't participate at all. They shouldn't be off task. They should not be talking to each other. They should
Right.
there are boundaries. But if they look like they're paying attention, you see their eyeballs. Maybe they're doodling and looking at paper, but they're clearly not doing something else. I had to take away a math paper
Hmm.
from a student in my Mandarin class because
Hmm.
I was like, that you can't pay attention while looking at math. Maybe you can,
Right.
but this is out of
It's
bounds here.
not, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But like I had a student once who had an accommodation for like being able to doodle or something in the hand that was like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, and I
So
might check
that's
in on
okay.
that student and say, hey, you getting this? Or I might ask them a question in the target language, or I might kind of
Hmm.
check in with them, and maybe not even right away. And I'm not saying like forever students don't have to participate, but I just think it's probably a good idea to make Willingness to engage. That's a term from
Hmm.
CERT. Was that CERT who came up with that? Willingness to
Maybe.
engage. I think that was in
Yeah,
CERT
could be.
2015. I don't know if it was his term, but it was in his 2015 book. And willingness to engage as like its own concept. But I think that like to foster willingness to engage, it's okay to have activities where the main goal is fostering the willingness to engage and let it
Hmm.
let it be kind of slow.
Yeah,
That's all I got on this. That's all I have on this topic.
sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Dan, do you want to take us out?
Sure. Yep. Thanks. I have been Dr. Diane Neubauer.
And I'm Dr. Reed Riggs.
Yep.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.